Hey, today I'm gonna show you how to knit this cold shoulder summer top. Let's get started. Please check my description box for all the details, such as yarn, needles, and a written pattern. This was the most easiest project I ever done. Super easy because I pretty much knit straight. That's about it. Once you know the basic, you can make any arrangement you want. And this project, I knitted it from the bottom to top, and I knit sleeves separately and connect. Then top of the project, I add elastic band. Pretty much it. Also, right there, looks a little bit like I decreased some stitch, but I didn't. Again, I just knit straight up. So again, this was the most easiest garment I ever knitted it. Anyway, that's the armpit. So make sure you knit long enough. Once you connect with sleeves, you can change the length. And about the sleeves, I didn't use the lace stitch. I use moss stitch instead of the lace stitch. So the bottom rib matches with the sleeves. It actually looks better. The reason why I didn't use the lace stitch because when I connect the sleeves and body, I need 8 stitch from the sleeves and body, which means stitch count will be changed. That's the reason why I didn't use the lace stitch. Anyway, that connection part I will talk about a little bit more later on. Now, sleeves. I knit sleeves separately, about only 20 rows, then connect. After the connected, I just knit all together. For the body, I just use the stockinette stitch, which is only knit. And for the sleeves, I use moss stitch. And after the connection, the length should be your choice. However, you will have to consider about the tube for elastic band. So you have to, knit extra inch or inch and a half, depend on your, the elastic band. And top of the tube, I add purl roll, only one roll, because I want to edge to be very crispy. If you didn't add the purl, it's going to be kind of round edge, which is okay. But if you want nice and crisp, you should add purl roll. Now, closing the tube. People probably think, oh my goodness, the sewing. No, I didn't use, sewing thing. I actually close with knitting, and I will show you the technique. You know me, I don't really like seaming, which is kind of sewing, right? Well, nothing wrong with the sewing. It's just my preference. Anyway, inside of the garment, around the armpit area, you can't really see the seaming because I used the Kitchener stitch bind off on the armpit gap. So it's really nice and smooth. Okay, so that is the, overall idea, what we're going to do. Again, if you know the basic, you can make any arrangement you want. Like, okay, the longer body, longer sleeves, and, flare, type of the really nice sleeves if you want. Or don't even bother making sleeves. Let's make it tube top. Make it shorter, like that. And if this is for kids, add straps on, top of the shoulder, something like that. Okay, so now let's talk about the measurement. I measure just about my bust, 33 inches, and I add 2 inches, make it 35. You don't really have to make whole, shoulder and body, because you will need the, separately. And let's do the swatch. My gauge 4x4. I need only stitches. I had 20 stitches, width 4 inch. That's my gauge. Let's find out my cast on number. 4 inches versus 35 inches, which is my desired measurement, equal 20 stitches, which is my stitch count width 4 inch, versus X stitches. This X means my cast on number. 4 times X equal 35 times 20, sorry. 4X equal 700. X equal 700 divided by 4 is 175. And the lace stitch cast must be multiple of 12 plus 1. So either 169 or 181. You have to pick the number close to 175, my magic number. So I picked 181. However, the rib, which I use MYST stitch, you need the cast number multiple of 2. So I start with 180, and then later on I will add 1 stitch after the MYST stitch. The yarn information is in my description box. Cast on. According to my math, 180. 180 is quite big number, right? And you don't know how much you're going to use the yarn to make 180 cast on. So this is what I do. You wrap the yarn around. I did 20 stitch. Well, 20 times I should say. That's about the same length you need to make 20 cast on. So that length is 20 cast on, so 40, right? Double. 60, 80, then 100. So now I double it. 100 plus 100, which is 200. So, a little bit extra would be nice. So that point, you have to make slip knot. Then you start making cast. Again, this is for about 200 cast on. So there's a little bit of extra, but better than, too short, right? So anyway, I will make 180. For the lace stitch, I need multiple of 2 plus 1, which is 181. But on the last row of the moss stitch, I will increase 1. So don't worry about it. So let's do the rib moss stitch. Super easy. First of all, let's join both ends. I will knit in round, so make sure you're facing to right side. And also make sure it's not twisted. Moss stitch, row number 1. Just repeat knit 1 and purl 1. That's about it. Just like a regular rib. Here comes, I add the begin marker and start with knit 1 and purl 1. And regular rib, from the second row, you just have to knit over knit and purl over purl stitch, right? But for the moss stitch, from the second row, you just knit over purl stitch and purl over knit stitch. If you never done this stitch, maybe at the very beginning you feel a little bit awkward. But don't worry about it, you will get used to. Here comes end of the first row, purl and knit and purl. And again, row number 2, super easy. Purl over knit stitch and knit over purl stitch. However, you can do repeat all, purl 1 and knit 1. Just repeat. And you just have to repeat row number 1 and row number 2 until your desired length. I did about 1 inch. Again. From the second row, purl over knit stitch and knit over purl stitch. That's how you do it. And reason why I picked this stitch instead of, just a regular knit 1 and purl 1 rib, because this is not the sweater. And I didn't think regular ribbon, knit 1 purl 1 or knit 2 purl 2, either one, doesn't go with summer top. But if you like just a regular ribbon, you can do that. And also the length, again, it's up to you. If you want to make it longer, you can do that too. But without this moss stitch rib, that's, I don't know, because if you don't make rib, it will curl up. So anyway, this is the last row of moss stitch, and after this I am going to start lace stitch, which means I need 1 more stitch. So I will create 1 stitch at the very end. Purl, and last stitch should be knit, so I will do knit front and back to create extra 1 stitch. Now I have 181. Let's move on to lace design. I let V stitch design. Row number 1 and row number 2, also every even number of row are on it. So I will meet you row number 3. By the way, this orange marker It's just a counting purpose. So I will remove the orange marker later. So don't worry about it. Again, row number 1 and row number 2 all knit. And this design complete on row number 12. Row number 3. This is actually end of the row number 2. Slide the begin marker. Knit 4 to start. And next white FSL1P, which means yarn front, slip 1 purlwise. So yarn front, slip 1 purlwise, then knit 1 with working yarn front. So you create the extra stitch there, and PSSO, pass slip stitch over. So 1 decrease, increase and decrease. After PSSO, knit 1, then knit 2 together. And yarn front. Then repeat start. With some bracket, you will have to repeat. So yarn front, then knit 7. This is repeating. So repeat off, knit 7, then yarn front, slip 1 purlwise, coming up, yarn front, slip 1 purlwise, keep the yarn front, and then knit next stitch, PSSO, pass slip stitch over. Knit 1, knit 2 together. Then don't forget, yarn front to end. Then you have to repeat, go back to knit 7. Don't forget about the yarn front at the very end. And you repeat until last 4 stitch. Then you will knit 4. And here comes end of the row number 3. Knit 2 together there, then yarn front. That's end of the bracket, and there's only 4 stitch left, so you knit. Remember, if you have a 5 stitch or 6 stitch or 2 stitch at the end, you did something wrong. Anyway, row number 4 all knit. Every even number of row all knit. Row number 5, knit 5 to start. Then yarn front, slip 1 purlwise. There you go. Then knit 2 together. PSSO. Then yarn front. Don't forget. And then repeat start. With the yarn front, knit 9. Every time you do the yarn front, you create the hole. Knit 2 together there, and PSSO, and then yarn front. So you have to repeat with some bracket until last 5. Here comes end of the row number 5. So yarn front, slip 1 purlwise, knit 2 together, PSSO, then yarn front first, and then let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There you go. I didn't make any mistake. Then row number 6, 7, 8, all knit. Meet you row number 9. Again, if you make one stitch wrong, you ruin the design. So you have to be very careful. Row number 9, knit 1 to start, and then repeat kicks in. Repeat off, knit 2 together, yarn front, knit 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yarn front, slip 1 purlwise. I'm checking. There you go. Knit 1, then PSSO. Knit 1. You have to repeat with some bracket until the end. Then row number 10, all knit. And here comes row number 11. Knit 2 together to start. And yarn front, knit 9. Then repeat start. Repeat off, yarn front, slip 1 purlwise first. Yarn front, slip 1 purlwise, then knit 2 together, PSSO, yarn front, knit 9. You have to repeat with some bracket until last 2 stitch, and I meet you at the end of row 11. The key is yarn front every odd number of the row. If you make a mistake, you ruin the design. So you have to focus, like I said before. Okay, here comes the end of row number 11. 2 stitch left, and I just did the knit 9, which is end of the bracket. And then now yarn front, slip 1 purlwise. There you go. Knit last one, then PSSO. Next, row number 12, all knit. Again, this design complete row number 12. So you just have to repeat row number 1 to row number 12 until your desired length. I did total of 6 times, but wasn't enough. But I didn't want to repeat one more time, so I just did row number 1 to row number 6 one time after the 6th repeat. So you can make some kind of the arrangement for the length, right? Either you finish row number 6 or row number 12, not any other row. There you go. This is what I did, and This is long enough. And that top part comes to your armpit. So you really have to make sure the length is long enough. Now I want to talk about the security line. I add 1 scrap yarn on the last row, and that's just for the security. Even if I make a mistake after this, you can save those lace stitch, because with this lace stitch there's the knit two together PSSO. It's really hard to fix if you ruin it, right? So after this, if you make a mistake, you just have to come back to this security line and start all over again. So if you're scared, you should put the security line like I did. All right, and now let's talk about those markers. First of all, 2 green markers. The begin marker should be right in the center of the back piece. Count evenly from that begin marker and split in half. That's the green marker, 4. Okay, that's a side marker, kinda, right? And then what about orange marker? 4 inch from green marker, both sides. So total of 8 stitch. That's going to be your armpit stitch. You know what I'm saying? So first of all, add green marker and then count from the green marker, 8 stitch total. And this is my sleeves. I already knitted. You know, the cast on number should be up to you. For me, 40 stitch and did the moss stitch. I just, wrap around my arm like this and then count. And 40 was enough for me, right? So cast on 40 and knitting in round using the moss stitch, and I knit 20 rows. And if you want to make the longer sleeve, this is the time you have to do it. Anyway, so I knit 20 rows and I pick 8 stitch from the end, and I put the scrap yarn and separate from the main sleeves. You know what I'm saying? Those 8 stitch goes to armpit. So knit from the begin till orange marker, and that's gonna be 8 stitch starts, right? So right there, 8 stitch. And then you actually move on to sleeve using the moss stitch for sleeves and go around. You know what I'm saying? I will actually show you. That's probably better. And the lace design stitch is already done. I'm not using lace stitch anymore. So after this, just knitting. And knitting with security line is a little bit tough. So please take your time. Sorry, my dog was barking. I'm not sure you heard that or not. My husband is eating dinner at this moment and he's begging. Anyway, let's start. Start knitting. Don't be in any hurry. Just take your time. Add the begin marker to start, the pink one, and then start knitting. Knitting until the first orange marker, the armpit, 8 stitch begin. Just knit, knit, knit. No more lace stitch. And here comes knit until first orange marker, okay, which, 8 stitch starts. This is gonna be the last stitch. There you go. And then remove the first orange marker. Grab the one sleeve, and this is the moss stitch. So the first stitch is knit, which means you have to make purl. And there's no cast on in between body and sleeve. Just move on to sleeve like that and kind of knit tightly. And do you know what? I decide I am going to add one marker. This is for later. You don't need to, but later you kind of want to know where the sleeve starts. So anyway, purl and knit over purl stitch. Sorry, my stitch was kind of twisted. So again, purl over knit stitch and knit over purl stitch. This is sleeve, so moss stitch you have to use until the end of the sleeve, which is not include the 8 stitch, okay, right there. And here comes end of the sleeve without the 8 stitch. I'm sorry, I tell you many times to make sure you understand. Sometimes it's annoying. And there's actually lots of, scrap yarn here and there, so, you get confused, but just be patient with me. Anyway, I did finish the sleeve. There you go. And the blue yarn is the 8 stitch for the sleeve, and then the purple, that's security line, right? So you don't really have to worry about anything losing, stitch or anything. Just take the needle out. If you didn't add the the security line, you have to actually put the scrap yarn there for the 8 stitch right there right now. But because I have a security line, just pull the the needle out. Only 8 stitch, Now you have to move on to body, and now just knitting. And again, I forgot to add marker because I am going to make the tube later on, right? So I kind of wanted to know where the sleeve start and ends. Anyway, now body starts. So knitting, no more lace stitch. So knitting until the other side of the sleeve. Then there's the orange marker and green marker. So knit until the first orange marker there. And here comes the other side is already attached. And you do exactly same thing. Knit until the orange marker. Don't worry, I will show you. And remove the orange marker there. And you can actually pull the needle, from the body needle first, because again, I have a security line, right? So I am not going to lose any stitch. But if you didn't add the security line, you have to transfer those 8 stitch onto the scrap yarn. Okay, and then second sleeve, add the sleeve marker and then moss stitch. So it was purl stitch to start, so I make just knit. And again, my stitch is kind of twisted, when I transfer to the needle from scrap yarn. So sometimes you have to fix the stitch, if it's twisted. Anyway, this is end of the sleeve. Now I am going to move on to the body, right? Obviously, I will add one more marker and keep knitting until the begin marker. And now I connected 2 sleeves onto body. After this, just keep knitting until your desired length. However, for the body part, you use the stockinette stitch, which is just knit because you're knitting in round. For the sleeves, the moss stitch until the end. Just keep knitting until your desired length. I think I knitted it about 3-inch, something like that. And please stop knitting right there and then make sure your garment is long enough, because you can't really fix it after this. And this length, which means finish project length, I'm actually folding top of the the project, but I will not fold my project right there, because after this I am actually going to add turning point row, so you won't lose any length from now. Okay, I was just checking, my elastic band. Anyway, so knit till the begin marker, and I am going to add turning point row for the tube, which is all purl, 1 row, even though with sleeves. After this purl row, everything goes to back piece. So after this purl row, I am just going to knit. No more moss stitch. This purl row make your edge very crisp. Okay, there you go. Now I start knitting. Until when? Until it covers the length of the elastic band. I knitted it about 6 rows after the purl row. Okay, so let's look. And don't knit too many rows, because if you knit too many rows means big tube, and then the elastic band will move around in the tube and it's not good. Anyway, I'm just showing you, if you didn't add turning point row, which is purl, it's going to be round, not crisp edge. So I'm trying to convince you to add the purl row, and it's easy to kind of fold it too. And one more time, I have to make sure whether I knitted it enough or not. And looks a little bit too short, maybe one more row, but I decide not to add any rows because the yarn is a little bit stretched out later on, right? So anyway, so now can you see the blue scrap yarn? Don't worry, I am going to explain. That's a guideline. You will knit up for closing the tube. Okay? When you fold, whenever it lined up, you have to knit the stitch up there. So it's kind of pain in the neck to do the guideline. However, it's very useful. So maybe you should do that too. Okay? So because you know what, whenever you close the tube, sewing or knitting, either way, it's really tough to pick up the same level of the stitch. It has to be straight. Okay? And especially the sleeves. The sleeves, I use the MYST stitch, right? So it's not always, the purl stitch that I have to pick. There is knit, knit, purl, right? So it's really hard to pick up the knit stitch for the guideline right there, right? So I skip the knit stitch and then I pick up the purl stitch like that as guideline. Again, after the purl, there's a knit, so skip the knit and then pick up the purl stitch and skip the knit and knit the purl stitch up like that and pull through and make sure it's straight. There we go, it's straight, right? Especially you have to do this for the sleeves. Anyway, even though you decide you're gonna sew around the tube, you still have to do this because same reasons to sew the tube has to be straight line, right? So guideline technique is very important. Anyway, look at this, it's straight. You probably will know what do you mean by it's really hard to pick up the straight line when you're picking up the stitch like this for the guideline. Anyway, so here is the body part, so it's all purl, so now you get confused, but look at the stitch very carefully, okay? Then you will figure it out, which stitch you have to pick. There you go. And I will show you the bad example, picking up wrong level. If you make tube bigger, that's maybe better mistake. Here comes. Can you see? It's not straight, it's kind of coming down, right? If you make tube too small, which means you can't put your elastic band through, or you have to change elastic band, kind of, the thinner one, right? So you really have to be careful. Anyway, this is end of the guideline. I have to do until the end. And then it's same level, which means I pick right stitch from beginning to end. There you go. Now, fun part, closing the tube. But you have to leave little bit, opening, because you have to put the elastic band, right? So I put the marker, make sure that's where you stop, about 2 inches, right? So if you decide you want to sew the two, you have to bind off, then sew them, right? But I am not going to sew them. So let's do that. After the, guideline, super easy, okay? So pick up or knit up. Oh, pick up is right word, probably. Pick up the stitch right there. That's the start, right? So now the new pickup stitch and original first stitch, knit two together. And then that stitches the next stitch. So either way, take the guideline out from the first one and pick up the second one and knit two together with the original second stitch, and then bind off. And I totally forgot about the bind off. I'm knit up the third one, and now I remember, oops, I forgot to bind off. There we go. So I went back because I knit two already, right? So I have to bind off the first one right there, and then I already pick up the third one, so I am going to knit two together there and then bind off. So you just have to do this until the marker I add, 2 inch before the biggie marker. Isn't it fun? Well, better than sewing for me. You have to bind off anyway, right? And this way, knitting and binding off, then, close the tube. Anyway, the most difficult part in this project for me was adding the guideline. Seriously. The knitting part was so easy. And, this, clothing tube is, if you have the, the guideline, piece of cake. So after this, I will show you how to pick up the stitch on the sleeve, because you skip the knit stitch, right? Nothing to worry about. Just pick up the stitch in between those two. That's about it. But I will show you, for just in case. The stitch with the guideline, which is purl stitch. So for the moss stitch, which is sleeve, you just did knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, right? Which means, obviously, on the wrong side, same thing. Knit, purl, knit, purl. So before you go on to the next guideline stitch, you have to pick knitting stitch right there. And again, same level. I'm sorry, it's hard to see. There we go. I just pick up the knit stitch and same thing, knit two together, bind off. Next, purl with the guideline, piece of cake. You do exactly same thing as before. I'll show you, so just be patient with me. This is purl stitch with the guideline. So you do exactly same thing. Knit two together after you pick up, then bind off. Then take the blue guideline out, and before the purl stitch with guideline, there's the one more stitch, knitting stitch. You pick that one up. Easy. Then knit two together, same thing, then bind off. That's about it. And from the right side, there's a little line, but which is good. That's kind of accent, texture. Nothing to worry. Now it's done. After you hit the marker, you just have to bind off and not closing. You know what I'm saying? And then leave the longer tail, enough, longer tail, because after you put the elastic band in, you have to sew it about 2 inches to close the tube completely, right? So again, you close the tube until the marker, 2 inches before the marker, and then bind rest of the stitch. That's it. And leave the longer tail for sewing later. Done. Pretty much done. And now you have to take care of the armpit. It's easy. Kitchener stitch. Transfer all the stitch onto the 2 needles like that, 8 stitch each. One from the sleeve, one from the body, right? There it comes. And with the tapestry needle, 1, knit first stitch, then knit front, then off, right? And 2, purl front stitch and stay. Leave the stitch there, then purl back needle right there, and then off means drop the stitch off from the needle. Then knit back stitch, then stay. Then come back to number 1, knit front, then off. Stitch off, purl front, stay there, purl back, off. And number 4, knit back stitch and stay. You just have to repeat number 1 to number 4 until one last stitch. So knit front, then off, and this is number 2, purl front, stay, pull back, and off. So just keep doing this until one last stitch. And then after you close the armpit, there's the big hole like that, and just close it. Just go around a few times and it will close. And I'm not going to worry about that too much because this is lace stitch. Here and there's a hole, so you don't really have to close. And this is under armpit, so nothing to worry about. That's enough. And weave the ends off. And there's a both side. There's got to be, little gap. Then close it. After you did the armpit, now you can take security line. I didn't make any mistake, so I didn't use that security line, which is good. It's up to you to do the security line and guideline, but I recommend you to do that because after that it's easy. Anyway, now let's put the elastic band. Obviously, I, wrap around my shoulder area and then I cut kind of, with extra length. And I put the across because I don't want to, twist it. So whenever it comes around, you will have to see which side you have to sew together. So with the safety pin, you know how to do, right? Put through and little bit tight because I didn't make the tube loosely. So just take your time slowly. Don't pull, project too hard. And there we go. Came through. And I actually put the safety pin there and then put it on to make sure. And I cut the extra piece. There we go. Then sew them together there. And before you cut and sew, please make sure the elastic band is not too tight or too loose. And if it's all good, just sew it out, pull the project and snuggle the band. And now you gotta close that too. And you still have the guideline there, right? So again, if you decide you want to sew the tube around, if you have the guideline, easy to pick which, stitch you have to pick up. So again, pick the stitch up with the guideline and then sew the tube to close it. There you go. Just take your time. It's really hard because now you have an elastic band in it. So sew straight down. Okay, this is it. You've done it. Well, I've done it. The most easiest summer top I ever knitted it. It took me about 10 days to finish this project, even if it's easiest, because I was so busy to do the spring cleaning and all that. Anyway, I'm glad I finished it. Now it's your turn to knit this. Enjoy knitting. Bye for now.